Christmas dinners were once the highlight of our year, but this year felt different, empty. It had been months since we lost Cog, our beloved dog who was more like a child to my wife Jenna and me. His absence left the house hollow. One night, Jenna suggested adopting another dog. Reluctantly, I agreed, and that's how Rolo, a quiet Labrador mix, entered our lives. Rolo was nothing like Cog. Where Cog had been an energetic whirlwind, Rolo was calm, content to nap in the dining room. But on Christmas Eve, as we prepared dinner, strange things began to happen. A faint, frantic scuffling echoed from the dining room. Expecting mischief, I went to investigate, but froze in my tracks. Rolo was running in circles, eyes wide with terror, as if chased by something unseen. Over the following nights, his behavior worsened. Every evening, he paced the dining room, panicked. We considered taking him to the vet, but he seemed healthy, at least physically. Then, on Christmas night, the dining room descended into chaos. Chairs were overturned, silverware scattered, and the window cracked open. Rolo stood in the middle, trembling and staring upward at nothing. The disturbances escalated. Footsteps, loud bangs, and the unnerving sensation of being watched. One night, as I investigated a crash, the temperature in the dining room plummeted. The air grew thick, suffocating. Then came the sound of glass shattering. I rushed back to Jenna, but she had seen it too. That's when we both froze. Standing in the dining room were 4 figures, masked and holding knives. Before I could act, one lunged at me, striking my face. Another grabbed Jenna, laughing menacingly. My desperation surged. I fought back, grappling with one attacker, but stopped when they threatened Jenna. Suddenly, chaos erupted. The masked figures screamed as unseen forces pulled at them. Rolo's collar was yanked, but just as one assailant raised a boot to harm him, he fell, clutching an invisible wound. The air filled with heavy footsteps, furniture shifted on its own, and a deep, guttural growl echoed. The attackers fled, one dragged by an unseen force. When the house fell silent, we checked the security footage. That's when we saw him, Cog, walking through the yard, vigilant even in death. We realized he had never left, watching over us and protecting our new companion from beyond the grave. I wanted this Christmas to be perfect, bringing my fractured family together for a feast. Everything seemed idyllic as the table was set with crisp white linens, shining silverware, and a perfectly roasted turkey. For a moment, I thought this might be the holiday that healed us, but as I began carving the turkey, something went terribly wrong. My knife hit an unexpected resistance. Digging deeper, I uncovered dark, unnatural flesh beneath the crispy golden skin. A sickly sweet stench filled the air, so overpowering it made my stomach churn. The room fell silent as everyone watched me with an eerie intensity. Then with a squelching sound, a pale, shriveled hand tumbled out of the turkey. Its fingers twitched as if alive, sending gasps and screams around the table. Before I could process what I was seeing, more grotesque limbs spilled out, bent, malformed, and leaking a thick black ooze. Finally, dozens of wide, unblinking eyes stared up at us from the bird's hollow cavity, their malevolent gaze piercing through the room. Uncle Frank, always the odd one, leaned forward with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Just carve it, kid," he said, his voice unsettlingly calm. The rest of my family sat motionless, their forced smiles turning into something predatory. The house seemed to change. The walls felt closer, the lights flickered, and an oppressive darkness seeped into the room. Shadows danced unnaturally, elongating and twisting as if alive. I tried to step back, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. A deep guttural growl rumbled from somewhere unseen, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. My cousin Clara suddenly stood, her chair screeching against the floor. "You're going to eat," she hissed, her voice sharp and commanding. Her once cheerful demeanor was gone, replaced by something wild and feral. The others followed suit, their eyes reflecting the flickering light like animals in the dark. Panic gripped me as I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair. I rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed tight, and the air grew colder with each passing second. The growling grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of scratching, claws scraping against the walls, the floor, the inside of my mind. As I turned back, the turkey on the table began to writhe. Its twisted limbs flailed, and the eyes blinked in unison. My family advanced, their movements no longer human but jerky and unnatural. Uncle Frank grabbed my arm with a strength that felt inhuman, dragging me back toward the table. "This is tradition," he whispered. "Family, feast, forever." I screamed, yanking free and running toward the kitchen. The lights cut out, plunging the house into complete darkness. The growls and scratches echoed all around me, closing in. I felt hands, too many hands, grabbing, pulling, dragging me back into the dining room. When I came to, I was outside, lying in the snow. The house behind me was dark and silent, no sign of the horrors within. My hands were covered in black ooze, and my mind raced with fragments of the nightmare. The only thing I could think was that I had escaped, for now. But I knew I'd never be truly free of what had happened that night. When the call came from dispatch about a power outage in Frostwood Hills on Christmas Eve, I reluctantly left my family's festive gathering. Driving into the isolated, snow-laden woods, I felt an unease settle in as the road narrowed and the air grew unnaturally still. The further I drove, the more the festive cheer of the town seemed like a distant memory, swallowed by the dark, towering trees. Arriving at the site, the power lines sagged under the weight of the snow, but there were no visible breaks. As I inspected the area, I noticed footprints in the snow. Not human, not animal, but something dragging, long and unnatural. My flashlight caught flickering Christmas lights from a nearby cabin, their erratic blinking casting eerie shadows. Approaching the cabin, I found a wreath twisted and stained with something dark. The snow around it was disturbed, as though something had thrashed about violently. Then I saw it, a man's body, frozen in a grotesque pose, his face contorted in terror. Clutched in his hand was a broken Christmas ornament, its sharp edges stained red. A sudden noise broke the silence, a low, rhythmic dragging sound. I turned and saw them. Shadowy figures emerged from the woods, moving unnaturally, as though puppeteered by invisible strings. They carried something between them, its shape obscured by the falling snow. One of the figures stopped and turned toward me. Its voice was a rasping whisper. "Leave." My instincts screamed to run, and I obeyed. As I sprinted back to my truck, the snow seemed to shift beneath my feet, almost alive. I fumbled with the keys, glancing back to see the figures approaching, their movements jerky and relentless. Finally, the engine roared to life and I sped away, the figures disappearing into the darkness behind me. Though I escaped, the horrors of Frostwood Hills stayed with me. The man's body was never found, and the town dismissed the events as a cruel prank. But I knew the truth. Something ancient and malevolent lurked in those woods, and it wasn't finished. Working as a security guard at an abandoned school wasn't exactly festive, but it paid the bills. St. Helena's, perched on a hill, was eerily quiet on Christmas Eve. As I locked myself into the building, the stale smell of rotting wood and faded holiday decorations set the tone for the night. The garlands hung limp, the wreaths were crumbling, and the artificial tree in the corner looked more like a ghost of Christmas past. Around midnight, faint, childlike giggles broke the silence. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, but as the sounds grew louder, echoing down the dark halls, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the laughter to the cafeteria. There, on a table, was a chipped plate holding a tattered doll. Beside it lay a note. Dinner is served. The air thickened, heavy with a sense of dread. The laughter intensified, no longer distant, but all around me. I turned toward the kitchen and noticed footprints in the dust, fresh, small like a child's. My flashlight flickered as I approached the janitor's closet, its door creaking open on rusty hinges. Inside was a feast, eerily pristine: golden turkey, steaming potatoes, and glistening cranberry sauce. The kind of meal you'd expect in a holiday dream or nightmare. Then I saw them. Figures with pale faces and void-like eyes stood around the table. They weren't human. They whispered in unison, "Time for dinner," their voices hollow and echoing. Behind them, the dolls began to move, pulling themselves into seats around the table, their glassy eyes glinting in the dim light. Panic surged. I banged on the doors and windows, but they wouldn't budge. The figures moved closer, their whispers turning to laughter, mocking, chilling. The dolls' heads turned to face me, their expressions almost alive. Just as I thought I was trapped, the door creaked open on its own. I didn't hesitate. I ran, only to find another plate waiting outside, bearing my name. "Dinner's ready, Dave." As I stumbled away, the laughter followed, growing fainter yet more menacing. The night swallowed me whole, but I knew one thing: I'd never set foot in St. Helena's again.